Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Marcus Aurelius, and this is Total War Attila, the Eastern Roman Empire, and History. And in the last episode, we had our first battle against the Visigoths, and as predicted, we were crushed. But that's alright, because even though we lost the 11th Legion, Legion Claudia, we did manage to take out nearly 2,000 of the Visigoths, which was my intention, was just to whittle them down as best as possible, because I knew that they were going to attack somewhere. Luckily for us, they decided not to burn the city to the ground. They simply sacked it, so that's going to help us a lot, because to repopulate a razed city costs a lot of money, somewhere around 20,000 gold, which we certainly aren't close to having at this time. Now, in the comments, it was asked that I show the units of the Eastern Romans in the video, and I thought that would be a great opportunity for me to also discuss the army composition of the Romans, both East and West, during this time period, since they were pretty much identical. So let's pull up the Total War Encyclopedia, which comes with the game, but I believe it connects to the internet because it takes some time to load up. Not sure how I feel about that, but from watching the battle, you've already seen that we have the cohors, and they upgrade to the Legio. You also saw the Exploratores, which I guess were like scout infantry. The description says that they're cavalry, or they're mounted, but they weren't in the battle. And you also saw the Limitane border guards, who in this game, when you research a certain tech, in fact, I think it's the first tech that you research, they upgrade to the Comitatenses spears. And that's a good opportunity for me to discuss those units as they pertain to the real history. There is a document that survives from this period, or at least it discusses the army composition of this period, and it's called the Notitia Dignitatum, or the List of Offices. And in it, it goes over the different units and their numbers. First of all, there were the Frontier Guards, or the Limitane, which is representative of the word limes, or limes, which is the frontier line of the empire. They were also known as the Ripenses, which is referencing the Latin ripa, meaning bank. And I don't mean a place where you put your money, but the bank of a river. And the reason for that is because the border of the empire was mostly along rivers, the Rhine and the Danube. The Limitane numbered, at this period in the east, roughly about 100,000 men. And they were spread out very thinly across the entire border in forts that were built for that purpose. Some of the forts held maybe about 750 men. There might have been bigger ones, but that's generally around the size. Then there was the Comitatenses, or the field armies. They were based in, well, there were two types of Comitatenses. There were some that were based in strategic locations throughout the empire, in big cities basically, behind the frontier. And there were some that were based with the emperor directly, and those were called the Comitatenses Presentales. They were the imperial escort army. In the initial founding of this unit, when Constantine the Great put them together, they all stuck with him. And the purpose of them was to protect him from usurpers. He had just gotten through a bloody civil war. But then, over time, the emperors decentralized the Comitatenses and put them again spread out throughout the empire in places where they would be necessary. They were still mobile field armies, but they were based in big cities. So roughly 64 to 65,000 were in the Comitatenses that stuck around in the big cities, and another 45,000 were in the Presentales unit that was where the emperor was, generally around Constantinople. And then there was the Scalae, which was a smaller unit of just cavalry, and the East had about 3,500 men in the Scalae. Now, the East had 7 units of Scalae, of which 5 were typical heavy cavalry. And when I say typical, I mean something like the Comes here, or the Equites Dalmatae. So the horses weren't heavily armored, but they were armored, and they had a spear. And then one of the units was the Klebinari, which would be, I guess, in shot cavalry. Yep, the heavy cataphract, basically. And finally, there was one unit of Equites Sagittari, or mounted archers. Let's see if we have some of those here. Missile cavalry. Yeah, Equites Sagittari. So, those guys were directly reporting to the Emperor, and they were always with the Emperor at all times. They did not have another commander besides the Emperor. And of those 7 units of Scalae, they picked 40 of the best men, and they were called the Candidates, or Candidati, and they were the Emperor's personal bodyguards. But because this is a game, and a lot of the enjoyment in these types of games comes in upgrading your units, there's obviously a lot more. Here's a camel missile infantry, which is kind of interesting. But typically when you go to the melee infantry, the Limitane and the Comitatenses were working in concert. In this game, they're actually an upgrade. So you upgrade from the Limitane to the Comitatenses. And then I suppose the Palatina, I guess, are an auxiliary unit of highly trained barbarians. And I'm not really sure what the Lanciari are. They're just a elite group of spearmen, I guess, or throwing. Okay, so they're kind of skirmishing spearmen. And of course, archer units were mixed into these Comitatenses and Limitane squads, as were the melee infantry. In this case, the cohorts and the legio. And the Palatina, it looks like, in this game are barbarian auxiliaries. Yeah. Reforms and expansions of Constantine the Great. The troops that generally stuck with the Emperor, the Presentales, were also referred to as the Palatina, to differentiate them from the Comitatenses who were stationed in the cities. So I've been told that this faction in the game now is really good at cavalry. They have 8 different melee cavalry units and 3 different shot cavalry. We looked at the shot cavalry. There were the cataphracts, the Klebinari, and the lancers. With melee cavalry, they all seem kind of... Then there's the excubitores. That, I don't believe... That's unique to the Eastern Romans, but I don't think that was founded until much later. Praetorians. Yeah, so AD 460. This game takes place right now. We're in 395. So these guys come a bit later. They almost have a proto-Varangian look to them, because it looks like they have a little axe there. I hate how it goes back to archers each time. It doesn't remember where you are. Otherwise, all we've seen so far are the Scout Equites. Oh, and remember I mentioned the Scalae? Well, here's the Scalae Palatinae. Their attack and damage are okay. Their health is really good. Where's their... Oh, armor, 32. I don't really have much of a frame of reference. I don't know if that's good or not. What's interesting is a lot of these, what you would consider to be Roman units, are actually recruitable by the Ostrogoths as well. So yeah, the Scalae is the Palace Guard, and they represent that pretty well here. So what else do we want to talk about? There's a unit of Pike Infantry, which is really interesting, the Menulatoi, and I've heard the name before. I haven't seen it in any of my reading of the sources, but I think I saw him in another game. A heavy spear, approximately 3 meters in length. Okay. Many people are excited to see the Greek fire ship, the Greek fire dromon. Dromonarian, I should say. Byzantine Marines and Byzantine Heavy Marines. That's pretty cool. I don't really know much about the Navy, honestly. We have just different types of galleys, dromons, warships. Field artillery. Just the onager, right? Chiero Ballistra. Okay, that looks really cool, actually. I wish I could see a better picture. So those are the units that we can recruit, and some of them are recruited through producing better unit building. Some of them are just upgrades through tech research. And it's interesting to note that each city also has a garrison. And for example, this city has Scout Equites, Cohors, Exploratores, Limitane bodyguards, and Sagittari. Now, the Limitane wouldn't necessarily be in a city in the inland interior of the Empire, but again, to kind of keep things game playable, it's probably the best choice to have. Now, these armies of the East and West were armed very differently than the previous Romans of like the time of Augustus and Marcus Aurelius, right? So we've all seen the picture of the Roman soldier with the lorica segmentata and the helmet with the crest and the scutum shield, the kind of rectangular but curved inward shield, the big shield that they carried. And then they had the short gladius, the stabbing sword. Well, during this period of time, the armies wore mostly mail and scale, and their shields were oval or circular. And they used a longer sword called a spatha. Also, in addition to that, some of them used a spear, a thrusting spear called a hasta. And what's interesting about that is we all know from regular Rome that the legions had pilums, or those two throwing spears that they could throw before engaging. Well, in this late period, they moved to something else. It was called a plumbata, and it was basically a throwing dart. And they had about a half dozen of these, which they put inside their shields. I'll actually, you know what? I'll put a picture of one up on the screen. And they had a longer range than the pilum. They actually could go about 30 meters, or roughly 100 feet. In this period, volunteering for the military was really low. So they filled the ranks of the troops in two ways, through conscription and, of course, through the barbarian federates, or the federati. And typically, they were looking for people from the rural areas, not so much the urban areas, because they found that the rural areas, the people were a bit hardier, stronger, and they also were picky as to what type of people they would allow. For example, for some odd reason, fishermen and cooks were not allowed to enlist, but blacksmiths, totally okay. Although as time went on, especially in the West, due to the crisis of all the barbarians moving in, the standards got a lot lower. It used to be before that it was conscription and the landowners would have to send their family members, but they started accepting slaves instead because they just needed manpower. And in some cases, slaves were even offered their freedom after their terms of service was over. Anyways, right now in the game, what I need to do is I need to build up a reserve army here at Constantinopolis based on my emperor. Where is good old Flavius Arcadius? Oh, by the way, Flavius Rufinus. So during this time period, Arcadius was a young man. He's actually 17 right now, but when he was younger, when his father Theodosius died, Rufinus was the advisor who was tasked by Theodosius to watch over Arcadius. So Rufinus isn't necessarily, I don't think, a member of his family, and he shouldn't definitely be his heir, but he did have a lot of control over Arcadius. Now in the west with Honorius, the person that Theodosius put in charge was Stilicho, a half-German general, and a lot of this period in history, you see a lot of infighting between Stilicho and Rufinus. There was a lot of distrust between both sides, and certain coordination didn't work out as a result. And this all kind of boils down again to how I mentioned that there were a lot of puppet emperors that were being ruled by other people behind the throne. And that was one of the reasons for the fall of the West, was just a lack of strong leadership. Good old Flavius here, we want him to be a general. I've forgotten how to do that. Oh, I know how to do that. So I go in and I raise forces, under Flavius. Now, as I mentioned, he's a poor administrator, but he hates barbarians, so he has a high morale against them, so he's definitely well-suited to be a general. He has the scholar trait, which increases research. Not so useful for a general, but still, it's nice, it's beneficial. And we'll reinstate the legacy of Legion 11, just to be cool.
Ready for battle.
Alright, so one thing to note is that the Spearmen Units, the Limitane Border Guards, and very soon, in one turn, the Comitatense Spears take 1 turn to recruit, while the Cohors, the Sword Units, take 2. So I'm going to start off with 4. I think 4 is the limit you can get in 1 turn. So I'm going to start with 4 of those, since I have some money to spend. I was also told to build farms in my most fertile areas. And that apparently is the islands. Is there a way to show fertility? Ah, there we go. So that's food. I don't necessarily know what that. Here's fertility. Okay. So our most fertile provinces are Bithynia and the islands and Egypt. So we should build our farms there. And I'm going to build my farm in the islands because they're really safe, it appears to me. I don't think that the barbarians are going to get to them anytime soon. So that's Gortina, Constantia, and Rhodes. So let's... I'm actually going to get sheep. Sold to get sheep. And to make up for the lack of public order, I'm going to move up the city size too. And that leaves me pretty much out of money. But next turn I'll have plenty of food. So where are my generals? Obviously that's the Emperor. He's building up his troops.
How can I serve the people of Rome?
This guy's almost where he
Call
needs to
this
be.
a garrison?
In all my playthroughs, these guys, Garama, they have never done anything. But I saw a Let's Play where they attacked, so I'm keeping these guys here just in case. Alright, these guys are almost there.
Advance.
And I'm just going to have them give all their troops to the Emperor and then move back to use their morale boost from city to city.
Gathering.
You go up there too.
Advance. What does Rome require of me?
You too.
Ready for orders.
You are going to stay there, but I am going to have you kind of
Hourly patrols.
go on a little trip to Edessa and back.
Ready for battle.
And you don't have anything, so you're just going to, I guess, stay in Serdica and keep the people relatively happy. Well, we'll move you to Scoopy,
I want hourly patrols.
and then back.
Call this a garrison?
Okay. Now, another thing I want to do, I might not have enough money for it now, is I wanted to recruit an agent. Yeah, unfortunately I spent my money. But you definitely want a champion with your army, because it improves their morale and strength, especially if they get some experience. And priests are great, because they improve the morale of a region. In fact, let's take a look at our generals, because they all have different skills.
Require of me.
I want to base someone in Constantinople who has the handler skill, which means they are better at creating agents. Son of a governor. That's pretty good. Is this really how I'm going to have to do this? Huh. I guess it is. Is there an easier way? Can I look at it from here?
Your command.
Okay. Well, no. Not really. So that's him again. We already saw him. Ah, here we go.
Orders.
Trustworthy. Lowers corruption.
How can I serve the people?
Political animal. So he's a fighter. Actually, that's what I should be looking at. He's the handler. Okay. So this guy, he gets agents recruited in his area, get +1 experience, and they're 15% less cost. So we want Flavius Abundatius to be in Constantinople, because that's where we're going to be recruiting both our priests and our champions. And he is... Oh, he's right there. That's this guy. Excellent. So we're going to just move him into Constantinople, and he's going to help us next turn recruit some agents. All right, ladies and gentlemen. Well, next turn, we're going to end the turn, and we are going to put some troops together and maybe move out against the Visigoths. We might have to wait one more turn to get some more troops, but I definitely want to move out quickly because while they're running around, even weakened as they are, they can still raise settlements, which I'm really strongly trying to avoid. So, once again, I am Marcus Aurelius. Thank you so much for watching. Have a good one.